Hello, and welcome to the 16th lesson in our Judges series, Judges chapter 17. And before we move too far into this, or before I get started, let me go ahead and open us with some prayer. Most gracious and loving God, we thank you for all that you do for us. Watch over us this day. Give us wisdom and insight into your word. Help us find meaning and understanding. Help us apply what we understand, what we learn, and what wisdom we can draw from your word into our lives and make us better people. Better people to serve you, to serve your kingdom, and to serve our fellow men. And in all things we thank you and we praise your name. Amen. We are at a transition point in our story. The Samson cycle and the demise of Samson signals an end to the idea of the judge-deliverer. The judge-deliverer has failed in every way, and that idea is what has been like the core of the book of Judges, which is the Judges actually begin in chapter 2, somewhere around verse 6, and end in chapter 16 with the death of Samson. As we began the Judges series, that first couple of chapters had to do with tribal identity, who they were among themselves, how Dan separated himself from Manasseh, and Manasseh from Ephraim, and Ephraim from Dan, and so forth. How each one of these tribal groups created their own identity. And we find that in chapters 1 and the very first beginning, the first part of chapter 2, all the way up through verse 5. It's in verse 6 of chapter 2 where we pick up with the first story of the Judges. Well, their identity kind of emerged as they were conquering the territories in their wars with the Canaanites. And here in chapter 17, through the end of Judges, we have the tribal identity is reemerging, and we get a description of a war conquest against the unsuspecting Canaanites of the far north. It also, as we move forward, we also see that toward the end of this book, toward the end, the last couple of chapters, we are in a civil war inside the tribes, among the tribes, the Israelite people. Well, in chapter 17 through the end of the book, through 17 through 21, we also return back to and find similar inquiries made of Yahweh, yet made of God, made of Adonai. And as we move forward this, we find out, they start asking the question is, which tribe will lead them into the battle? And again, just like in the earlier part of this, in chapters 1 and the first part of chapter 2, and here again we will find in a very shortly, not in today's lesson, but in a not too distant future lesson, we'll also have the people again, the Israelites asking who will lead us, and the answer twice comes back. The two times they asked, it comes back that Judah is the one who will lead. Enemies in both cases are different. But we will explore that as we move forward, how the enemy turns into something different as we move toward the end of this book. There is an emphasis as we move forward, starting around chapter 20. There is an emphasis on Judah as the leader. But there is a kind of a downward trajectory that kind of helps us to explain what's happening here. Is there's a repeated refrain, and I mentioned it last week that the Samson story where he saw the woman who he wanted to be his wife, he saw this that was good in his own eyes, he went to do that regardless of anything else. And we have that again toward the end of the Samson story again, where what he sees is important, and the fact that they plucked his eyes out because what he saw was what he wanted and he took. And so we see that as the transition where we're bringing the idea of what comes next. Now, all through Judges, we've had the idea of a monarch, that there is a pattern for a leader as a king. And as we move forward, beginning here with verse in chapter 17 here, we will see it also repeated in partial in chapters 18 and again in chapter 19. And then toward the end of the book, right there at the end of chapter 21, we will see a very similar phrase. And the phrase, or we'll see a phrase, and that phrase is, in those days Israel had no king. That's the phrase that's repeated 4 times. But the first time that statement is made and the last time that statement was made, they also add the refrain, everyone did as he saw fit. So that's the dominant theme from this point forward in our story, and that's the theme that we're supposed to be keying on, is that they did not have a king, and everybody does what they think is best. Well, the story here of the judge deliverers has revealed there's an inadequacy in that. There's a failure in that leadership model. And every time that the judge steps up and redeems the people or gets the people out of the bondage or whatever, they turn right back and go right back to their old ways. And it seems they're even encouraged to do this by the leadership. So this is a very subtle attempt to look at a royal model as a kingly model, and what would arise that king model would come out of the tribe of Judah eventually. One that would encounter the propensity for everyone to do what is right in their own eyes. So the theme is everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes, but what God's trying to put in place is that God is in charge, and that's the way it should be, and that a king will come out of this, a monarch. And again, the second part of that, everyone did as they saw fit, or he saw fit, and it only appears in chapter 17, the chapter we're going to talk about next, and the tail end, the last chapter, chapter 21. There's only found one other place in all of Scripture, that particular phrase, or something very similar to it, and that's in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 8. Although the words are not identical, what is said in Deuteronomy, the quote out of Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 8 is, "You shall not act as we are acting here today, all of us according to our own desires." That's as close as Deuteronomy comes, but it's very similar, is the idea of that in the future you're not supposed to act this way. What's doing right in what your own eyes, according to your own desires. Which is what the idea is of doing right, or doing what they believed was right in their own eyes. That's telling us here, in their own eyes, in their own judgment, in their own and the word desires comes out here, their own desires. With these, because we saw that with Samson. When Samson looks at the woman, the Philistine woman, and wants her as a wife, regardless of anything else, that's all he wanted. His own desire was what was important. And so that's kind of the part of the theme that we're seeing here all through this, is that our own desires are what we act on. Part of this also is that Judges chapter 1 all the way up through Judges 2:5, and then Judges chapter 17 all the way up through the end of the book, 21 through 25. Those form the bracket around the central theme of the judge deliverers, which are, of course, failures in all their way. All through the story also, between chapter 2 and chapter 16, all through this also we have the theme, the idea of a kingship, the idea of a king, although each time it's been rejected. It was rejected by Gideon, it was rejected by Abimelech. In both, all of that has happened through chapter 6 and through chapter 9. What's interesting though is that it's not that they rejected. What they rejected was not royal leadership, but the kind of royal rule that is envisioned by in First Samuel. In First Samuel, and eventually we will get to the Samuel stories, because that really is a continuation, or the next stage after Judges. Just for your information, when I finish Judges, I'm going to go to Ruth, because Ruth is part of the Judges story. It takes place during the period of the Judges, and then probably after I finish Ruth, I'll move on and do First Samuel and continue that way. For my video messages, or for my video class, for the in-person class, which have not started yet, we will continue as we have. We will continue through the New Testament. But for the video series, I went all the way back to this. So, as we move forward, we will become aware of a link between chapter 17 through 21 and figures who appear to be maybe the grandson of Moses and Aaron. Those parts of the story will appear in chapter 18 and then again in chapter 20. That section here that we're looking at, chapter 17 or chapter 18 and 20, they kind of point that this whole section we're reading, chapter 17 through 21, takes place very early in the Judges story. And actually, if we were to pick this up and we were to put it earlier in the Judges story, it would fit in the pattern of how things are. But the author is trying to make a point here, is that the end of the series of Judges is the same as the beginning of the series of Judges. And that's what he's trying to show us, is that there was a failure all the way along. They're looking for a monarch, but they're not looking in the right way or in the right place. They're not doing this according to how they should. And in a lot of ways, they're doing it as they see fit, as their own desire plays out. And so the author is the author of Judges, the man who compiled this, the people who compiled these stories together, did this in a very particular pattern on purpose, to connect the old with the beginning with the ending, to show a continuation of story, and yet even though the stories are chronologically out of place, they're thematically laid into place for us to see the fall of the tribes and their failure to be able to live into their relationship with God, or their relationship with their fellow tribe members. As we begin our stories in Judges chapter 17 and 18, which is the story of Micah, we need to recognize this story is focused on the cult sites. And the story criticizes the period of the Judges by representing this period as a period of anarchy. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did as he pleased, or as he saw fit. So in terms of chronology, this story is set at the beginning of the age of the Judges. It's placed at the end of the book here, again, to emphasize that the end period was the same or similar to the beginning. And that through this whole period of the Judges, they were not able to fix the situation. They weren't able to fix their political arena. So the solution to this, as what is pointing to is, the solution is a monarchy, a king. There are several details in this story that link it to the Samson cycle, to the Samson stories. And it's the illegitimacy of the northern sites. We also have the 1,100 silver shekels. There's a sum of money. There's several details in the story that connect these two stories together, which tells us the author did this on purpose. He took this story from the beginning, placed it in the end, and then made enough connection to the previous story to actually make it flow. And so these two stories of Samson and this story of Micah flow together because of details found in the story. Not necessarily details that connect the two stories, Samson knew Micah. No, it's that there's similarities in the story, and that's what connects the two, which shows us truly the brilliance of the author of the writer, of the composer, or the compiler of these stories, the one that puts them all together. It just kind of shows their brilliance. Okay. Let's go ahead and move into the story, finally. I'm sorry about all the rambling, but this is part of what we need to understand about Judges. So, moving now into the story, Judges chapter 17, beginning with verse 1. There was a man in the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. He said to his mother, "The 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse, and even spoke it in my hearing, that silver is in my possession. I took it, but now I will return it to you." And his mother said, "May my son be blessed by the Lord." Then he returned the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. And his mother said, "I will consecrate the silver to the Lord from my hand for my son, to make an idol of cast metal." So when he returned the money to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to the silversmith, who made it into an idol of cast metal. And it was in the house of Micah. This man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and teraphim, and installed one of his sons, who became his priest. In those days there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. Our story, this is establishing the Micah's house of God, which is, and again, this is a negative portrayal of how to worship God during this period of time. So again, we cannot mistake, or we cannot not see the connection between the Samson story and the Micah story. There's a close relationship between all of this, but both the Samson story and the Micah story involve Danites. They both make reference to Zorah, Eshtaol. They both identify Manahaim Dan as the gathering point. They both mention 1,100 shekels of silver, and they feature ritually separated individuals who violate their regulations, as we will see. So, as we move forward here, the hill country of Ephraim is where this story takes place. It's in the hill country of Ephraim, and the town itself is not specified. We don't know what town it is, but it's rather just the broad region of the hill country of Ephraim. The main character is right here at the beginning of the story. His name is Micah. And what's really interesting is that the name we have here that is saved is Micah. But the very first time his name is mentioned, in our translation it says Micah. But if you were to go to the Jewish translation, or go back to the original language or the original text that we have, the most oldest text we have, the name that is there is not Micah, but it's a similar word. But what it really means, and what's really interesting about it, is that it's like it has the word Yehu and also Ah. So it's Yehu-ah, Yah. And so Micah's name in its original, and the first time it's presented, his name was Micah here in this chapter. The first time it's mentioned, although it doesn't appear that way in our text, is his whole name. And his whole name means, "who is like Yahweh," which is really interesting. After this first time that his real name is given, although it's presented again in ours as Micah, in the original Hebrew or the original Aramaic, the original language that this was written in, his name is longer, and it means "who is Yahweh." But what we see is that the author subtracts Yahweh from his name after that very initial time. Although we didn't see it, the original readers would have saw that. After that very first time, the author shortens his name to Micah, and that's where he's referred to from that. After that point, all through the rest of the story, his name is Micah. which means that the author has removed the Yah, removed Adonai out of his name. And so that's just kind of an interesting little point of the story, is that his name originally had Yahweh in it. And then the author takes the Yahweh out of his name, basically because Micah is not truly honoring Yahweh in his work here, in what he's doing. The story also informs us that Micah's mother is a widow, his father is dead, and he is identified as the head of the house, or the house of the father, which is known as a Bet Ab. The Bet Ab is the head of the household, or the house of the father, which would be a literal translation. It's the smallest family unit in Israelite society, and it usually has 3 or 4 generations of males descending from one patriarch and with their wives. Children, servants, priestly personnel, that's part of that house of the father. And so Micah is the house of the father. He is the head of the household, because his father has died and he has assumed the roles of the leader of the household. Part of that responsibility will be taking care of his mother. And what we find in the story is that the 1,100 pieces of silver that we find out we're actually kind of entered the story right in the middle of the story. Apparently the money has disappeared and is gone, and the mother cursed whoever stole her money. Now, this could have been the only survival money she had left. It's interesting is that the amount of money stolen was 1,100, that it connects it back to the Samson story. One of the things that some of the scholars, not a lot, but a handful, maybe 5 or 6 of our current modern scholars of our scripture, throw out the possibility that the mother named here, the unnamed mother, and again this is an unnamed mother, just like the previous stories back in the first part where the woman is usually not named, although she plays a significant part of the story, she's not named. Here also the woman isn't named. There are a few scholars, like I said, that kind of say, well, maybe this is Delilah and that Micah is Delilah's son. And since Delilah's husband, or the father of Micah, would have been Samson, who died and never married Delilah, but we don't know. That is just kind of one of the possibilities that was thrown out by some scholars, is that the money, mostly because of the similarities in the money and so forth, but regardless of all that, we can throw that possibility out there, but we'll never know the truth about that. But she cursed whoever stole her money. And Micah comes to his mom and says, "Mom, I'm the one who stole the money. I took it, but now I'm going to give it back to you." Maybe it's because now Samson is dead, or her husband is dead, whoever he was. And now she cursed the person who stole the money. But now that Micah is the head of the household, he really stole from himself. And so he brings the money back and he returns it to his mother so that she could be, so she could live, because maybe this was all the money she had in the world. And this 1,100 shekels was what's going to keep her alive for the rest of her life. 1,100 shekels is about 11 years worth of income. So it's very possible that this would have been her, this was her source of income, this was her source of survival, and he had stolen it from her. He fesses up to that, and he returns the money to her. And, but it also seems that he's returned the money because of the curse that she spoke. So he returns the 1,100 pieces, and she then, in an attempt to maybe undo the curse, she says, "May my son be blessed by the Lord." She had cursed whoever stole the money. Her son returns the money, telling her, "I stole the money," and then she tries to turn that curse over into a blessing. So, the next thing she does then, and again, maybe it's to appease the curse that she laid on her son, not knowing it was him. It's very similar in some ways to, we have the story out of 1 Samuel. And again, 1 Samuel and Judges connect together in a lot of ways. But we have that story right out of 1 Samuel where Saul makes a vow to God that anyone who takes any food before the fight is won will be put to death. And it turns out that Jonathan, his favorite son, is the one who actually breaks this vow that Saul made. And so Jonathan, his favorite son, his lead son, and David's best friend, is condemned to death because of this. Now Saul finds a way out of that, or Jonathan finds a way out of it for himself. And again, here the mother is trying to find a way out of the curse that she laid on her son. She's trying to find a way out of that. And so here then she says, "Well, I consecrate the silver to the Lord from my hand for my son and make an idol of cast metal." There are two different words, and we'll hit the second one here. But this first one, this make an idol, is I consecrate the silver of the Lord from my hand for my son to make an idol. Now, the woman has made a vow, and the vow that she actually made in literal terms is that she consecrated the whole amount of 1,100 to Adonai, to Yahweh, to make an idol. Now, the first word here, the idol, is a wooden carved object, not a cast object. But then the second word she uses, an idol carved of cast metal, which is a different word altogether. So the way the story is laid up here, it sounds like she has dedicated all $1,100 or all 1,100 shekels to God, to appease God for what her son did. And there are two different words that are used. One of them is carved and the other is cast, which is really just kind of throws a little confusion into here as to who was to make the carving and who was to do the casting. But as the story progresses, it kind of clears itself up, although it is still confusing to a lot of scholars here, because there's an idea here that she was tasking her son was creating the carved item, and then she gave 200 shekels of the 1,100 shekels that she was supposed to give to a metalsmith to turn that metal into a cast object. There's a lot of different ways of translating that or figuring that out. It could be that the son was to design it and carve it, and then it would go to a metal caster who would create a mold and then cast the metal, cast it into a solid silver object. Or it could be that the son is out of the whole carving business, and that these two words were used because that's just the way it is. These two words, idol and cast metal, are found in other places where they're connected together. But in those other places, it actually is talking about two different items, that there was first a carved item, and then there was plate put over the top of it. And again, that could be what this is there was originally a carved item, and then the silver plating was put over the outside of it. We don't know. It doesn't matter really too much, other than the money was given to a silversmith. 200 shekels of the 1,100 was given to a silversmith, and he turned that into an idol of cast metal. Micah takes that idol of cast metal and he puts it into a shrine that he has in his household. Then he has an ephod made. Ephod, again, is an outer garment that represents a priestly garment. It's a priestly garment that only a priest wears, is an ephod. And also teraphim, which were household gods, little idols, little household gods. The difference between a teraphim and an idol is that a teraphim represents ancestor worship. And so the little teraphim represented making prayers to your ancestors to change the outcome of the world today. Where an idol is you pray to the idol as if it were God. And so there's a difference between the two. And the ephod is, again, a priestly garment. And so he has a shrine now. He has this idol he's put in there. He also has the little household teraphim, which are the ancestor worship. They're not gods so much as they represent ancestor worship or ancestor inquiring into an ancestor, asking an ancestor for a resolution to a current problem. And he goes further. Micah goes further. Not only does he create a shrine to Adonai, he puts an idol in there. Supposedly, just like the golden calf, just like his brother Aaron had created when Moses went up on the mountain and the people were screaming, "We need a God, we need a God," and Aaron creates a golden calf, a cast idol out of the gold that they collected from their earrings and so forth. He creates this idol, but he names the idol Yahweh, and then they have a great big festival the next day, a big party, which is what Moses hears. And Aaron had tried to turn this idol into a representation of God, which of course we know is wrong. And that's kind of what Micah's doing here. He's created a shrine to Yahweh, but he's put an idol in it, and then maybe even calling that idol, this is Yahweh. And then he puts also ancestor worship items there. And then the final blow to the properness of what's going on here is he makes his son. Now remember, this is a Danite, and his son is a Danite, and only Levites can be priests, but he makes his son his priest. And then it tells us in those days there were no king in Israel, and all people did what was right in their own eyes. And so what that tells us here is Micah, who made the idol, who did the teraphim, who made the shrine, who put his son as a priest, all of these things were right in his own eyes, but not necessarily right in the eyes of God. Yesterday I got interrupted. I had finished verse 6 and had done all the conversation about that, as you just saw in the video. But as I was going to make the next half of that, picking up with verse 7 and moving forward, I made a technical error. I'd gotten distracted. I came back to film the second part of this thing, and when I filmed it, and it took me another half an hour, about another half an hour or so of conversation, I realized last night as I went to edit and to post this video, I had failed to turn the camera back on, and so I filmed, I missed a big chunk of what we've done here. I took another break, I turned it back on and finished it out, and so half of what I did yesterday did not get filmed, and so I'm refilming today the second half. So, picking up now with verse 7. Now there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judah, of the clan of Judah. He was a Levite residing there. This man left the town of Bethlehem in Judah to live wherever he could find a place. He came to the house of Micah in the hill country of Ephraim to carry on his work. Micah said to him, "From where do you come?" He replied, "I am a Levite of Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to live wherever I can find a place." Then Micah said to him, "Stay with me, and be to me a father and a priest, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, a set of clothes, and your living." The Levite agreed to stay with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. So Micah installed the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and was in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will prosper me, because the Levite has become my priest." Well, as the story progresses, we find a new character is added here at verse 7. So far, this priest, this Levite, is unnamed. So, he is the young man at the moment that the story begins here with him, or he's introduced into the story. We find out that he is a man who who had lived in the town of Bethlehem in Judah. There are two Bethlehems that I'm aware of. One of them was up in the northern territories I believe it's in the territory of Ephraim. I could be mistaken about that. I think it's in Ephraim. It could have been in Manasseh, but I think it was in Ephraim. And then there's the Bethlehem that's down in Judah, which is where David came from, where Jesus was born, that Bethlehem. And that's the Bethlehem they're talking about here, the Bethlehem in Judah. Now we need to know he is not from the clan of Judah. He is a Levite that resides there. The Levites had a special status. Among all of the tribes, they had 48 towns that the Levites owned. And that's all the land they had. They did not own any clan or territorial claims. They had no territory. And so all they had was the cities. And if the Levite did not live in one of those cities, but actually lived in one of the other towns, one of the towns that belonged to the other tribes, the other brothers, then they lived as an alien in that town. They lived as an alien, and they worked as an alien, and they were considered an alien in the town. So that's what he was, and he was living there. But he needed to move. He needed to, maybe the work dried up, maybe, something happened, whatever it was, he couldn't find any more work there. So he decided to go find a place where he could find some work. And so he starts wandering around, as the story tells us. Well, as he's wandering around looking for work, looking for a place to live, because all Levites, no matter where they are, unless they are in one of their towns, are aliens, they're wanderers. So he's wandering around looking for a new place to find a living, make a living, have a life. Well, he comes to the town, to the house of Micah. So in his travels, he ends up there in the hill country of Ephraim and wanders into the property of Micah. Micah meets him, greets him, and is, as is custom for the region, for this place, Micah asks him a couple of questions. And the first question he asks in our reading here is, where do you come from? Where are you from? Now, we've probably picked up the second question, because the first question he would have asked him was, what is your name? And then, where do you come from? Those would have been the two questions, and most likely in that order. But we're not given that first question because we're not given the priest's name. But we're going to have to assume that Micah was following the direction of the hospitality rules. And the hospitality rules is you find their name, you find out a little bit about them, where they're coming from, where they're going, what is the purpose of their travel, and so forth. And in doing that, what you're doing is you're establishing a friendship. So they're no longer a stranger in your home, they're now somebody that you know, because you know their name, you know where they're going, you know where they come from, you know something about them. They're no longer a stranger, they're a friend. And that's what the hospitality thing is all about, is to make a friend, to make someone that you know. And then you provide them with, with a meal and so forth. And that's how the stranger works. Well, he establishes a connection with the man. Where are you from? And he says, I am a Levite of Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm looking for a place to live and a place to find work. I'm wherever I can find a place, that's where I want to go. We need to again remember that the Levites are an itinerant. They are travelers. They don't have a settled place where they can be. Micah then invites him to stay with him, and to be, and the way he words this is, and to be to me a father and a priest. In some way, a lot of scholars look at this and they say, oh, well, he's offering up the fatherhood, the leadership of his particular family group. And that's not his And that's not what this is. What Micah is offering him is a respected position. You honor your father and your mother, and you respect them. And that's what Micah is doing here. He's establishing him not as his father and the head of his own household, but as a respected individual among the household. He says, stay with me and be to me a respected elder that I will listen to, and also be my priest. And so, and the difference between, of course, a father and a priest is that the father in this situation is someone you respect and honor, and you listen to them for wisdom and so forth, and guidance in life and so forth. And a priest is a spiritual father to you. And so in some ways what he's saying is, be a father to me, a respected individual that will offer me good advice, and also spiritually be a father to me and offer me spiritual advice and help me in that direction. And he tells the man, if you do these things for me, then I will give you an annual wage of 10 pieces of silver. I will also make sure that you have clothing to wear, you have a house, a roof over your head, a place to stay, and I will give you a living. That phrase that I will give you and your living, I will give you and your living, in this is also, I will also give you the sustenance you need for your survival. I will give you your daily bread. So I'll provide you with housing, clothing, food, and an annual salary. So the Levite agrees to stay and be his respected elder in a sense, someone he can go to for advice, and also a respected religious leader in his life, which his idea is this would be closer to God, make him closer to God. So he installs him, and what it tells us also, he became to him like one of his sons. Now, if we remember back in the last section of this, the last piece of the story is that he installed his son as the priest, which of course is totally wrong because his son is a Danite, as I explained at that time. Well, here, this Levite here, he says, it treats him more like he's one of his sons. And so he's moved him into his household. He now treats him like a son, although he wants to, he treats him with respect and honor like he's a father, but in the same sense here, he brings him into his household and he loves him or treats him like he's his son. He installs the Levite as his priest, and the young man becomes the priest of his household. And it's in his household, too. It was in the house of Micah, which is important. The other part of this is, and then Micah says, now I know that the Lord will prosper me because the Levite has become my priest. Micah now has established in his household, he has a shrine. For him, the shrine, well, in his mind, the shrine is dedicated to Adonai. However, it isn't the proper way to do that. As we saw in the last section of this, the last piece of the story is, he was doing everything wrong. He had the shrine in his house. He had the cast metal, the cast metal idol. He's got the teraphim, which is the family, the honoring of the dead, and a representative of the dead for the family that they could ask and get family and get ancestor information that would supposedly help them in their current time. And so he's established the shrine, an idol, the teraphim, and also the ephod, the priestly clothing. He's created or made all of these things, and now he's established this priest, this Levite, as his priest, in the hopes that this would get him more in line with God, and that God, Adonai, would help him to prosper. And so he's really looking out again for his own self, not necessarily for the good of God or the good of creation or the good of his fellow man. He really is looking out for himself. Help me to prosper. This is this shrine that we have here. As we move forward in the story, we will see that this shrine plays, the shrine, the idol, the teraphim, the ephod, the priest, play major parts of the next phase of the story, which we will pick up next week with chapter 18. And it is, chapter 18 is the migration of Dan and the beginning of a civil disturbance inside of the tribes. And again, that's next week. I look forward to having that class with you. I do apologize for the interruption in the service. You probably, or this class, I know you didn't notice it, but I did, and it troubles me a lot when I make these kinds of stupid mistakes that I made today or yesterday. And so, anyway, I look forward to next week's class as we pick up with Judges chapter 18. So, my friends, I want you to go in peace to love and serve the Lord. And all God's people said, Amen.